If you're looking to build your aerobic base, then you may well have heard things like this. I'm telling you, you've got to run slow to go fast. Base building, bro. No. Nasal breathing only. Chill, man, chill. Just keep it aerobic, keep it aerobic. And you might be left wondering what all this actually means. Well, stick around, because in today's video, I'm gonna break it down for you. So in today's video, we're gonna be talking about how to build your aerobic base. And as somebody who's completed everything from running a 4:58-minute mile to a double Ironman distance triathlon, let me just start by emphasizing just how important this is. So let's start by addressing the obvious question. What is your aerobic base? Well, in simple terms, it is your ability to sustain steady state work over a long period of time. Aerobic quite literally means with oxygen, whereas anaerobic means without oxygen. So simply, aerobic training is utilizing your oxidative system. Thus, by improving your aerobic threshold, you'll be able to go further and faster with less blood lactate, which means less fatigue and ultimately a longer time to exhaustion. Now we need to establish our heart rate zones, and given that 99.9% of us don't have access to lab level data, here are 3 ways in which we can establish and work within some heart rate parameters, assuming you have access to a way of tracking your heart rate. Don't worry if you don't, we're gonna break that down in the next section. First of all, let's consider the classic 220 minus age equals your max heart rate. We then take 50% to 70% of this to establish our aerobic training parameters. This is a bit limited and generalized in the long term, but as a starting point for beginners, it's a great way to establish some boundaries to operate within so that you can get some work done before you progress to something a little bit more individualized and specific. Next up, we have MAF 180, which is a popular approach, but not one I've ever actually personally used. The premise is similar to 220 minus age, but in this case, it's 180 minus age, plus a few modifications based on the Maffetone formula, which you can find information on online. This is better because there's more data and information that underpins the formula, but again, it is largely generalized and therefore limited in the long term in terms of establishing specific to you, the individual goals. Next up, we have lactate heart rate threshold zones, which are what I personally use and what we've used with thousands of athletes all over the world at Omnia Performance. Link is in the description down below if you would like to level up your hybrid training. The test is simple. You run max distance for 30 minutes and you take the average heart rate and average pacing for the final 20 minutes, and that will establish your heart rate threshold and your threshold pacing. We then take up to 89% of this to establish our aerobic zones, and therefore we can set training zones accordingly if we start to work in speed work or sub-threshold or tempo stuff, which we'll come on to shortly. This obviously requires a certain level of running ability to begin with, which is why I've sort of worked through the tiers to this point. But again, given that 99.9% of us don't have access to lab level data, using devices on our wrist and what we have available to us as recreational athletes, I think lactate heart rate threshold testing is one of the best things that we can do from a running perspective. The question on some of your minds is probably, well, Fergus, what if I don't have access to a heart rate tracking device? Well, I have 2 things for you to consider.
Number 1 is the talk test, which is simply to run at a pace at which you can maintain a consistent conversation, as I'm doing right now with you guys. If you can't maintain a conversation, then you're running too fast. Simple as that.
Number 2 is to do your best impression of The Rock and focus on nasal only breathing. This can function as a really effective form of throttle control by holding you accountable to your current aerobic abilities. Again, if you can't hold pace by breathing only through your nose, you're running too fast. Outside of training, we all know how important it is to manage things like nutrition, sleep, hydration, stress, workload, so to improve our overall recovery. And that is where Whoop can step in. As the world's most comprehensive lifestyle tracker, it gives you feedback and data on sleep, strain, recovery, key health metrics, stress, and much more. With this information, you can take action to improve your day-to-day routines, habits, structures, so to better underpin your overall recovery and support your aerobic development. The word recovery is heavily marketed at the moment, and I want to make crystal clear that Whoop doesn't in any way suggest that it's going to do the recovery part for you. Instead, I view it as a 24/7 convenient tracking tool so that you can have all the information you need to better understand what's good for you, what's bad for you, and most importantly, take action on those things to improve your day-to-day existence. So if you want to give Whoop a go, you can get your first month free via the link in the description down below, and you've got up to 30 days to see if it's for you. Otherwise, you can send it back. You're also supporting the channel in doing so, and you're giving yourself data from your wrist 24/7 that can better inform your recovery, your adaptation, your development, and your day-to-day routines and structures. So what's not to love? back to the video. So point number 4 is on how to build your volume, and it's important to not jump in at the deep end with your volume, or indeed into this canal right here, as it's filthy, cold, and will leave you feeling pretty worse for wear, as building up your volume too quickly will. Now, I can't be too prescriptive here given that I don't know your individual training goals, but ideally we don't want to increase our total weekly volume by any more than 10% at a time, so to be measured, cautious, and reduce the risk of injury. Research indicates that the biggest contributing factor to injuries in recreational athletes is a sharp spike in volume too fast, too soon. So the best way that we can avoid this is by adding in another mile or two here or there, or another short run every couple of weeks or something like that. Build steadily, because after all, the more sustainable athlete is the better athlete in the long term, because you'll spend less time injured and more time training, in the same way that the better, more reliable car is the one that has you on the road the most of the time. You don't want your car in the garage, you don't want to be injured. Make sure that you treat yourself with care and deliberated training volume so that you're constantly on the road. When it comes to building your aerobic base, there are some mistakes that are often made. First of all is worrying too much about finding the perfect or the best running shoe rather than just getting to work. If I had £1 for every single time somebody has asked me this question, I would single-handedly be able to revitalise the current state of the British economy. Secondly is assuming you're easy. I've seen time and time again, I've done it myself, that we can't be trusted. We simply cannot, which is why it's so important to establish clear heart rate parameters like we've discussed earlier, so that you can be working within the right effort level. Thirdly is believing that, Fergus, it's literally impossible for me to be able to run that slow is the case, when in reality it probably isn't. You're probably just not used to the gait, the mechanics that goes with moving at a slower pace. In ultras, I've been running up to about 13 and a half minutes per miles, and whilst yes, it's been more of a shuffle than a run, it's still running. Or if your heart rate capabilities actually don't allow for you to be able to run, even if it is at the slower end of the spectrum, then walking uphill, walking with weight, whatever it might be, is a great way to build your aerobic base, as can be exercise bike alternatives, ski ergs, rowing machines, swimming, things like that, so that you can get your heart rate stimulus moving and ultimately build yourself to the point where you can build up your running volume. There's no shame in that. There's no shame in looking at where you are and looking at where you want to get to. The exciting part is the process and the work that is entailed in getting there. And that's what this video is all about. So the next question to address is when to add in faster workouts. And again, I can't be too prescriptive here without knowing the context of the individual, you that's watching. But from a beginner's point of view, let's say that you've been doing base building, pure aerobic work for 12 weeks or so. It's probably about now that you can start asking yourself the question, when do I add in some faster stuff? If you're an intermediate or advanced runner, you're probably doing these things already, but let's break it down. So faster work generally looks like intervals, tempo, sub-threshold work, or fartlek training. And with the heart rate zones that we established earlier, you can prescribe what paces and effort levels these specific faster sessions should be. You can add these in slowly and cautiously, as I've hopefully stressed enough already. And it's important as well at this point to start really aligning the sessions that you're doing with your training goals, because the main thing with fitness, whether it's running, triathlon, lifting, strongman, tiddlywinking, whatever it might be, is specificity. I believe that the vast majority of us, in general terms, can make a huge amount of progress over a long period of time by following this simple template. One interval session, one tempo or sub-threshold session, and then one or two purely aerobic longer runs throughout the week. So whether that's 3 runs or 4 runs, that gives you a healthy dosage of different training stimuli across the week, which means that you're developing your energy systems all whilst continually building your aerobic base and realizing the gains on the faster stuff that is coming from the foundation of your aerobic threshold that you've raised through building your aerobic base. So to go right back to the start, when we had person A saying, well, to go fast, you've got to run slow, that's where that point really comes to life. So there we have it, 6 things to consider on how you can effectively build your aerobic base, which is ultimately the foundation of all fitness. The more that we can increase our aerobic threshold, the more that we can effectively recover from bouts of high intensity, the more that we can improve our recovery outside of lifting. All of the things that feed into general overall health, well-being, fitness are supported by our aerobic capacity. So if you haven't already done so, it's really worth investing the time and energy into, guess what, building your aerobic base. And there are 6 points for you to work in and do exactly that. So if you do have any questions, drop them in the comments down below. Make sure that you have liked the video, please and thank you. And if you haven't yet done so, obviously hit the subscribe button, because you've made it this far in the video. You've had 6 really insightful tips and you're keen to find out what happens next time. So thank you very much for watching. See you soon.